how much more the CEOs are at the top are making than the average worker.
So it's not looking at all CEOs in the US and choosing the median. This is looking at the very top 350 CEOs and then comparing it to the median worker.
These innovative CEOs, they're just big scam artists. They honestly have a lot of engineers who do the work for them. Then they take the credit for this innovation.
I think actually a big problem is that the government puts restrictions on how much people can build and where. And I think that is a big factor in driving the shortage of homes that we have. Like, I don't think that's the thing that should sort of outweigh the other data that suggests that, the average American worker is better off than they were historically. Like the fact that their real earnings have increased. They're spending a lower percentage of their income on food. They're spending a lower percentage of their income on clothes.
You're trying to say it's not going to make enough capital, but that isn't necessarily the reason for a co-op. Sometimes a lot of these places they're more sustainable. They are more diverse. There's a lot of women, people of color that work at these places and own shares in it. There are many more things that people are driven by besides capital.
Folks, liking and subscribing really helps me continue to produce content and is greatly appreciated. You can also make sure to check out my Discord server in the description below, where you can also find my Twitch, my Kick, and my Twitter. Okay, so firstly, I think most of my audience will recognize you from the Jubilee video. I don't know if you have anything else that you do or they want to shout out or tell my audience who you are roughly.
My name's Grace. I'm just a schmegular girl. I do comedy. I'm an activist. Yeah. I was on Jubilee. And I'm here.
Well, it's nice to have you. Yeah, you were on the Jubilee video, the capitalist versus anti-capitalist, and listen, I feel bad. They represented, my side, okay, with PBD, who I feel is a dumbass, who I feel did not debate in good faith, who I feel is he doesn't even, I don't even know how, he doesn't seem to mind whenever Trump does things I would consider not even really that capitalist. So, I guess the thing you mentioned to him is probably the place I want to start, is about poverty. Now he said capitalism has brought the most people out of poverty compared to any other system ever or whatever. That claim is, in my opinion, that claim is kind of vague enough where it's not super meaningful either way. But I do think we have seen a pretty dramatic decline in certainly extreme poverty, which is the thing I think PBD was talking about. And, there are disputes over the methodology for that. But I think essentially, regardless of what methodology you accept, we have seen a pretty dramatic decrease in extreme poverty. And a lot of that is because of economic growth from, broadly capitalist institutions and countries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think, and this is what I tried to raise with PBD, was our marker for extreme poverty is fucking whack. I'm sorry, $2 a day. That's what it means to be under $2 a day is in extreme poverty. So I think that our markers are just not, and that's not what I'm seeing. Okay, I'm seeing more homelessness than ever. I mean, I live in California. I live in the Bay Area. And I'm seeing so many people struggling, friends, family members having to have multiple jobs just to survive, not knowing if they can pay rent that month. And our homelessness is at an all-time high. Since we've been, collecting data, this is the highest it's ever been. So I think it's just kind of a cover-up for what's actually happening. So that was my...
So I think... so on the poverty line, it's I don't think it's entirely unreasonable to take somewhat of an issue with the $2. It's now $3 a day because they adjust it for inflation every now and then.
Excuse me, $3. Oh.
Yeah, no. It used to be like $2 a day. I think it used to be like $1.90 a day. But more recently, they recently updated it to $3 a day. So I think it's I don't think it's that specific line is supposed to be a line of extreme poverty, right? Is their definition. That's a, that's a line of like, no one living on $3 a day is having a particularly good life. No one who measures this thinks that at all. But I think even if you use, the world, they have like different lines of poverty. They have like $3 a day. They have like $6.25 a day. I think they have they have like $8 to $10 a day or whatever. All of those essentially saw a decline up until about 2020. It's stagnated a little bit after 2020, probably mostly because of the COVID and fallout after that. Hopefully that decline picks back up again. But it doesn't really matter where we draw the individual line, because the entire distribution of income has shifted to the right. Everyone has gotten richer, and that's going to mean less people are living on $3 a day, but also less people are living on even higher lines like $5 a day, $7 a day, etc. And that's all.
Well, yeah.
I mean,
$20 extreme poverty, and I don't know if I buy into everyone's got richer. I think that most people that have gotten richer at the top, these mega fat cat wealthy elites. And oh my God, sorry, I just remembered, not to just derail the thing. I saw your bio, sure. Jared, pro-inflationist liberal elite. No, Jared, no.
Oh my God. Do you know what? That's why
do you want to make the average American life harder?
No, so the reference there is there's like a conservative Wikipedia thing. It's called Conservapedia, and pro-inflationist liberal elite. I think it's like their opening for Bernie Sanders. It's like Bernie Sanders is a pro-inflationist liberal elite, so that's why I have that in my bio. But we could talk about it if you want to. I am to some extent probably pro-inflationist, in that I think. I don't know if I don't think inflation targeting is optimal, but I probably do think, if we were to do what I would consider optimal monetary policy, you would see, you would still see above zero inflation in most years. But before we get to that, if we do want to talk about that.
No, there's time. We'll work with this. It's okay. But no, I'm glad it was just a thing most.
Right. So, also, Justin from the video is also wishing you best of luck. I mean, I'm just like I said, there's a fair amount of dispute with economists over this data even. And there are economists who, by the way, will say even the World Bank measures of poverty and the Our World in Data poverty stuff that shows the dramatic decline in these poverty rates. There are actually economists who say that actually underestimates the decline in poverty, but there are a fair number of economists who also state that it overestimates the decline in poverty. Contingent on, I would say, I'm not the most educated on it, but contingent on PPP, which is how they adjust for different purchasing powers between countries, contingent on that being pretty good, which I don't know enough about to say whether or not it's pretty good. I would lean towards it being pretty good based on the economists I've seen. The economist I like the most saying it's pretty good. Contingent on that being pretty good, I think that data about world poverty is pretty okay. But essentially no one, certainly even the people who take issue with some of the data points still agree that there has been a decline in global poverty. Everyone has gotten richer. And, to the extent that we see we might see increased inequality, but that's typically not because the poor are getting poorer and the rich are getting richer. It's just because the rich are getting richer faster than the poor are getting richer. And that's true. I think that's true within the U.S., but that seems to be true in most countries around the world that are seeing increased inequality. And so at the end of the day, we still have seen a pretty dramatic decline in both extreme poverty and sort of higher measures of poverty that we might want to look at too.
I think we have to talk about too, though, the cost of living, right? The cost of living has increased astronomically. Price gouging, housing, everything has gone up and up and up and up at a much faster rate than the wages and whatnot. Like you said, the rich is getting richer faster. So one would say this is not, you're not in extreme poverty, but they're also not taking into the account of how much the cost of living has rised.
Well, they do take that into it.
I think the average American is suffering more because of that.
So, I mean, the data about global poverty does take into account inflation. It does adjust for the cost of living. It's accounting for the cost of living, and it's accounting for the differences in purchasing power between countries. So the data showing the decline in poverty does show that. I do also think that, like, although obviously, like, it is true the cost of living in the U.S. has gone up, I do believe incomes have generally gone up faster for all income quintiles, essentially. For even the bottom, even the bottom 20% of Americans are probably still seeing their earnings increase faster than inflation most years, at least, save for 2020 and COVID.
Do you have I don't remember what the stats are exactly, but how much more the CEOs are at the top are making than the average worker?
So it's only about the data people usually cite for that is pretty bad. So the data people are typically citing is
what I would anticipate.
What? Sorry.
That's what I would anticipate. That it's pretty bad.
Well,
the difference is pretty big.
No. Yeah. So what I mean by pretty bad. So usually when people cite these numbers, they're like, oh, CEOs get paid a bajillion times the median worker salary, and they're typically citing the EPI. Like the EPI, as a lot of these, what I would call L's. Okay. So what the EPI is doing is they're looking at the top 350 publicly traded companies within the U.S., right? So first of all, this is not the median CEO, right? This is not looking at all CEOs in the U.S. and choosing the median. This is looking at the very top 350 CEOs and then comparing it to the median worker. And then secondly, they're looking at a sort of like fixed amount of firms, when really, when the number of firms in the U.S. has obviously been increasing because the population has been increasing as well. So when you look at just a fixed number of firms, 351 firms, I think they look at,
what is it?
40 years ago. What is it? What's the
rate? Yeah, I just looked it up and it says 285 times more than the average worker as of a 2024 study. I'm not sure if that's what you're referencing.
I mean, that might be. I don't know if that one is DPI specifically. It's probably the EPI or something similar. Like I said, a lot of even if it's not the EPI, it probably makes the same general mistake where we're looking at, like, we're not looking at the median CEO. The median CEO only gets paid, like $258,000 a year, I think. If you look at all CEOs, they're only looking at the very top 350 CEOs essentially, and because they're looking at like a fixed amount of companies, and the number of companies keeps increasing, like you're actually looking up higher and higher on sort of the income distribution of firms over time. So, the top 350 firms in, 1970, we'll say, which usually I don't think they go that far back, but in 1970, we'll say, it's probably only going to be like the top, like that might be the top 1% of firms. But because there are a lot more firms today, if we look at the top 350 firms now, those might be the top 0.1% of firms, right? So you're looking sort of higher up on the income distribution of firms and of highly compensated CEOs, and comparing that still to the median worker. So that is, that is pretty silly in my opinion. If you look at the data that you can just...
Can I pause it for a second? Can I get in there for a second? Just so I looked up what I was looking up, and you're right. The study that says they make 285 times more than the average worker is the S&P 500. But then I also looked up the S&P 500 companies hold about $54.6 trillion of our American money. And so that's a lot. I know there's still these, like median companies, like you're saying, these, smaller CEOs, I suppose. I don't know that I have compassion for small CEOs either. They're pretty well off to begin with, but it's still a shit ton of our money. Still a lot of inequality happening there.
Sure. So they might hold I can, I'll talk to that in a second, but I do want to be, like I sent you something in DMs. Like if you just look at like, the median CEO and then divide it, by or compare it to the median worker, their earnings, like, it is still like relatively high probably by your metrics, but it is, over the last 20 years, probably actually decreasing. Like the trend has actually in general been downward. But when you say, I might be a little bit confused at what you mean by saying that the S&P 500, they own 56 trillion in wealth.
Yeah, of the American money. So basically, I looked and I said, how much does the S&P 500, own in American wealth? And $54.6 trillion that they hold. So about $54.6 trillion, right? The majority of that's going to the CEOs, not the workers underneath them, is what I'm saying, because those are the CEOs that are earning over 285 times more than the average American. So in reality, that's a lot of people that are getting screwed over, paid poorly, unfairly, being exploited. I digress.
Right. So I don't know. I don't know why we would, just infer that most of that is going to, most of that is going to CEOs, not workers. I mean, if you just look at like sort of the labor versus capital share of, of total income, of total GDP, like the labor share has pretty consistently been like approximately 7% of GDP, and the capital share approximately 30% of GDP. But I think I think, are you just would you say 56 trillion? I'm still a little bit confused what that number is referring to. I don't know if we're referring to just the revenue that they make, or like just all the wealth that they have.
Yeah, that's all. Yes. And that they are holding.
That's just all the wealth that they hold.
Yes.
I mean, I guess it's not like maybe that's not like 100% surprising to me that like 500 companies or whatever like have a lot of wealth, because these are like obviously large global companies. Now I don't like necessarily, I think if we want to, if we should be comparing it, I guess, then to like the wealth that that most Americans have, and then we can see whether or not that type of inequality has gone up over time. And the best data I've seen suggests that, actually the, like wealth inequality in America, certainly if you include Social Security, which is like how big is the Social Security trust fund right now? It's probably, I don't think it's 56 trillion, but I think it's I think it's kind of close to that. I believe it's like, I don't know, I believe it's like valued somewhat close to that. It might be lower, I don't remember. I think it was, I can't find my number or whatever. But, certainly if you include Social Security, our retirement benefits that aren't included in a lot of measures of wealth inequality that are traditionally put out, that, that shows that wealth inequality in America just like has not gone up significantly.
Right. Well, I was referencing those companies specifically because that was, I know you were confused about why are we talking about them, but that's because.
Well, I was confused what the number refers to exactly.
Yeah, right. Well, it's just how much those companies as a whole, those S&P 500 companies hold in wealth. And those are the CEOs that are making over 285 times their average worker. So my point was basically, they're wealthy. They've got a fuck ton of money. They're making more than 285 times their average worker. And that is wrong. That.
Mm. Well, I don't know. I don't know if we can infer just from the sort of like total amount of wealth they have, again, that like most of that even is going to the CEOs or whatever. Again, I think if you look at like CEO earnings, like actual median CEO earnings compared to like median worker earnings, like the difference is not like super significant. And certainly like, it has not been, I don't think it's like been substantially increasing over time. And then I think if we, like, I think, you would also, would we say like that's wrong or whatever, I don't know what I don't know how we're arriving at that. So the evidence I've seen suggests that CEOs actually get paid probably less of what's called their marginal product compared to the average worker. So, the marginal revenue product is just the sort of extra revenue that any given person contributes to the company based on the fact that they, work there. The average worker probably gets about 85% of their...
Did you just say CEOs pay less?
They get paid a smaller percentage. So they get paid a smaller percentage of their marginal product. So the average worker probably gets about 85% of their marginal product, basically the revenue that they contribute to the company. And most of they don't get 100% because a lot of, they work, there's other types of compensation, like the company has to pay for worker training and stuff. CEOs probably only get about like 68 to 73% of their marginal product. We can look at data, for example, when CEOs are suddenly hospitalized or when CEOs suddenly die, and then we can see like how much the value of that firm decreases. And from that, we can estimate essentially how valuable that CEO was to the company. And, if you look at that data, it suggests that actually we don't, CEOs get paid, like I said, a smaller percentage of the marginal product than the average worker does. I think CEOs typically are incredibly valuable to companies. That is why they are so highly compensated. And if you look at firm survival, even after CEOs die, the firms where CEOs die are much less likely to survive over the next 2 years compared to firms where the CEO didn't die.
Right. So I understand your statistics and your numbers, but I'm just wondering what that looks like for average Americans, right? With our homelessness at a all-time high, people being, not able to pay the bills, having to work 2 to 3 jobs, and then saying the CEOs deserve to be 285 times more because they're more worthwhile and they're working harder. The fact that we live in a meritocracy is a joke.
It's not even that they're working harder. It's just that the innovation that they do, is valuable. And the reason they're so highly compensated is because companies truly believe that, they are it is worth it to compensate them. They believe it is worth it to compensate CEOs that much to keep them around and everything. I think CEOs, sorry, can I interject? A lot of times these CEOs these innovative CEOs, they're just big scam artists. They honestly have a lot of engineers who do the work for them. Then they take the credit for this innovation and this big, change to society or whatnot. No, they're just great at marketing. They're great at scamming and they're great at exploiting people. Well, no, I think so. The CEOs a lot of times are not going to be the ones doing the day-to-day innovations, but they are going to be the ones doing leading the company, doing the innovative business plans. Like I said earlier, we can see that in the fact that the rate of survival for firms that CEOs die is a lot lower than CEOs for companies whose CEOs didn't die, right? So that's evidence that clearly, even if they aren't the ones doing the sort of day-to-day work, coming up with new products or whatever, they are leading the company. They are doing the big picture stuff. They are doing very important things.
What's so important? So to be specific, what is so important? I'm gonna push back on you a little bit. What is so important that they do if they're not doing the innovating, if they're not doing the labor, if they're not doing the work? What is it?
I think that a lot of times they are doing innovation. It's just not the type of innovation that you're thinking of when we say they're not the ones literally inventing the new technology. Sometimes, sometimes you do see that. Certainly, but just think of Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos didn't necessarily invent most of the technology for Amazon, right? He was not coming up with a ton of new products or whatever. But he was innovative in the sense that he founded Amazon, and he started working on business plans to, for example, get 2-day shipping to everyone, right? And, he had a lot of these CEOs are innovative in the sense that they have, very innovative business plans. Jeff Bezos wanted to get 2-day shipping to everyone. And consumers have benefited massively from the fact that there is, just a lot of cheap products in Amazon that they can get affordably and quickly. I think I'm sure that's the type of big picture innovation that CEOs do. And CEOs, I think over time, by the way, have only gotten like more. They've only had more and more responsibility put on them. Now we live in a globalized world. They have to understand global supply chains. So the CEOs are going to have to, understand that. A lot of times CEOs are going to have to understand a lot of stuff about corporate finance, considering how big publicly traded companies are and how important like their stock and share values are and everything. Like this is, that's a type of innovation that you see CEOs doing.
I think that's just a really nice way of saying they're really good at exploiting people.
Well, like why would we?
Really
why would we see that like?
Okay, go ahead.
Firm survival is like lower when CEOs die if they weren't truly valuable, and why do we think like boards of shareholders would compensate CEOs so highly if their work wasn't valuable?
My guess is they're the puppeteer, right? Like they know how to work the system. It is a skill. What you are describing is a skill. Absolutely. I will give credit to that. To be like a master manipulator, figuring out how to move all these moving parts, like you said, find the cheap labor, find the cheap resources, have as much profit as possible for the top. That is a skill that, in all fairness, not everybody can hone. We're not all built like that.
I mean,
so
it seems very unlikely to me that like CEO so like I don't want to deny like this like kind of is a thing that like can conceptually happen, but it seems very unlikely to me that like we would so consistently see like boards of shareholders compensate CEOs very highly simply because the CEOs have like manipulated them or have a skill set devoted to extracting as much like wealth that they can out of people. Like it seems very unlikely that we would consistently see this failing, this overcompensation of CEOs in this way, when that's not a efficient way to run companies. Presumably that money, if it went to the CEO when it was unnecessary, could have served a much better purpose, investing in some other part of the company.
Right. I'm sure that there's other logistical reasons as to why companies can fail once a CEO dies, but I definitely think that can absolutely be one of them. But I'm not a shareholder, not a CEO. I can't give you that direct answer, but that would be something that I would consider. And yeah.
Well, I mean, like I said, I think like the evidence points to, CEOs just being important and CEOs just doing important work, which is why the board of company boards and shareholders typically compensate them so highly, because they want to keep them around. They don't want CEOs. Right.
Yeah, CEOs are important. They just don't need to be getting paid 285 times more than the average worker, is my belief. But yes, absolutely. You need a captain to steer the ship. Of course, captain.
I mean, like I said, I think depending on what data you look at, they're not necessarily even compensated that high relative to the median worker. But it's not. But I guess my point would be like it's not it's not zero sum. So just because the CEO is getting paid more doesn't like mean like all these workers are going to be so ultra exploited and everyone else is going to get like paid a fuck ton less or anything. I think like if the innovation that CEOs are doing is important, not only is that going to, for one, that typically it's going to benefit consumers, right? It does benefit consumers. It does benefit Americans largely, generally, that they have access to ChatGPT now, that they have access to 2-day shipping from Amazon, that all these innovative businesses that they interact with day to day have these cheap prices, have these high quality goods, have these services that people value. That's why they buy them. That's why these companies are so rich in the first place, is because consumers want these things. And also, it's probably going to help workers generally if, a CEO is, savvy enough, is smart enough to do productive investments to make their company bigger, to make workers more productive, which is going to bid up the wages of workers, right? Like generally, like it's not a zero sum gain. And like, I think that's why you see, and we kind of touched on this earlier too. Like you do just like generally see the incomes of everyone rising, even America. Like I think homelessness is kind of a unique thing because of the sort of unique constraints that we put on homes or whatever. But like if you just look at Americans' earnings adjusted for inflation, I do think you see that going up over time for even the bottom 20% of Americans. Like
Yeah, no, I think that, I mean, this whole trickle down economics does not work. I mean, our minimum wage is $7.25 an hour, and that hasn't raised since 2009.
Right, but like I care way more about sort of what the median worker earns, or even like the income growth at the bottom quintile. So only 1% of workers make the minimum wage, right? And a lot of people who make minimum wage are people who are teenagers who live with families, or secondary income people who live in multi-earning households and everything. But more importantly, less than 1% of people make minimum wage. We should just look at income growth, earnings growth, and that has increased across quintiles over time. That's what's more important. And my point is not trickle down. My point is it's not zero sum. Is that there are positive sum transactions, and sometimes positive sum transactions or systems are going to have increased inequality as a result of them, but they're still positive sum. Like workers and CEOs are both better off under this system.
Right. No. Yeah, that's where we're just going to disagree on that. So I'm looking for something.
Sure.
Yeah, so I think a big thing that we have to worry about too is AI, automation. A lot of jobs are being taken away from that as well. And a lot of CEOs are coming out and saying now they cannot wait to replace workers with AI, because workers AI doesn't complain about wages. They don't complain about time off. They don't need, they don't unionize. And I think that's another thing that we're seeing as well, that jobs are being lost. You're arguing that jobs may be paying better, but there are much less jobs. I know people, and this is what I'm seeing on the ground level too.
I think there might be, maybe we expect automation to have some impact in the future, but like right now, unemployment is at 4.3%. The job market is getting a little bit worse recently, but overwhelmingly most people who want a job as of now have them. And I do think it is relevant. Like if we say we're just going to disagree on whether or not workers are better off, is okay, well, I have data suggests that most workers are better off. I'd be curious what we're citing to suggest that workers aren't better off.
Well, as I just said, the homelessness level is at an all-time high, and you can blame that on housing. And yes, that absolutely is a thing as well. But if people could afford to live in houses, you think they would just choose to be homeless? You think if they got paid a livable wage, they would do that?
I don't think the fact that people are homeless is mostly due to people not earning a livable wage. I think typically most people in poverty, like a lot of people in poverty, a lot of homeless people are people who don't work to begin with. It's elderly people, it's veterans, it's people who struggle to get a job to begin with. So mandating a living wage is not going to be the way you're going to deal with that. And I think the reason housing is so unaffordable in the first place is typically, like I said, because of the sort of unique constraints that we place on housing. But I don't think overall, I don't think housing and homelessness is a thing that we should primarily be looking at. I care about real income growth and real income growth. Just real quick, when I say real income growth, that includes the cost of housing in it. That's adjusting for inflation, and inflation, depending on what inflation measure you use, is anywhere from housing is 30% of CPI. That's one inflation measure, and 20% of PCE. That's a different inflation measure. So I think I am including the cost of housing in my measurement. I'm just not only looking at homeless people.
I think that's a huge measurement, though. And I think you keep trying to disregard that. And I don't know that I necessarily believe people are just homeless because they wouldn't work to begin with. What did you name? You said veterans, disabled people, elderly. Yes, elderly. Obviously, we should not be making them work. I agree. We need social safety nets for that. And that's why I do believe in having more of a democratic socialist country. But to say that most people are homeless is just because they're choosing not to work, not because there's not people, or should I say people living in their cars too, who are working one job, sometimes two jobs, still not able to afford, just a basic cost of living. I know you keep citing these statistics, and that's great. I'm not an economist, but I can tell you what I'm seeing and what the average American is going through. And I think that just throwing a number on there or a statistic it's really lacking empathy in reality for a lot of Americans right now, most average Americans.
Right. So for, I for one, I think like when I say like, I'm not talking about people who like are lazy and like, and can't and aren't getting a job or whatever. I think involuntary unemployment exists, and I think there are people who like shouldn't be working. And I don't know exactly, to be fair, how this breaks down in the homelessness demographic, but one reason in general, like I favor what I would call, redistribution, things like welfare benefits and taxes, although I would have a pretty much more efficient tax code than we have now, over the sort of, pre-distributed policies that I think a lot of people in the socialist camp like to talk about, like, for example, you talking about like the living wage or whatever, is because with these redistributed policies, you can target a much wider net of people who like aren't working or shouldn't be working, right? Like you can, like elderly people, shouldn't be working. I'm sure. I'm not sure what percent of homeless people are elderly and or disabled and or like, people who we view as like shouldn't be working. But I'm sure it's probably something in a ballpark of like 30% ish, or if not more, of homeless people are these type of people who like either cannot or really like morally kind of like should not be getting a job, right? Like, and the living wage and minimum wage that's really high is like not going to significantly help them, because they're not the ones who are working. And I think there are other, and we can talk about this if you want to, I think there are other drawbacks to most of these pre-distributed policies. With minimum wage, obviously the main one is going to be any concerns that we have about disemployment, potentially reducing hours of other people or reducing employment of other people as well. So there's going to be people who are hurt by that, and or raising prices, which is going to hurt a bunch of other poor people. And I don't think you would necessarily see the same thing with a redistributed system. We had an efficient tax code. But I think, I don't want to discount the fact that America has a housing crisis, like has a homelessness crisis. I don't want to discount that fact. I talk about that decently often, on my stream. That is a big issue to me. I just think like it's, for one, I don't view it as a failing of capitalism on its own for the most part. I think there are plenty of other capitalist countries who don't see this homelessness crisis. I think actually a big problem is that the government puts restrictions on how much people can build and where. And I think that is a big factor in driving the shortage of homes that we have. And I just don't think it's, I don't think that's the thing that should sort of outweigh the other data that suggests that, the average American worker is better off than they were historically. Like the fact that their real earnings have increased. They're spending a lower percentage of their income on food. They're spending a lower percentage of their income on clothes. The quality of most of their products has gone up, right? Like that's something
really quick. Sorry, can I interject? My brain's gonna like numb over. I can't if I can't hit some of these points that you're saying. You talk so fast and you have a lot. So I'm gonna have to interrupt you every now and then. No, how you were just saying right now, you said a lot of Americans, I think you said your data is saying that they're spending less on groceries. Did you just hear how people are actually putting buy now, get now, pay later for their groceries? It's actually happening right now. Mm-hmm. People are kind of doing layaway process, basic necessities. And I'm sure that would actually probably feed into why your statistics are there. I'm sorry, if you can't afford your groceries right now, we live in fucking hell. We live in hell. If you have to do buy now.
I think it's crazy to say that we live in hell if some people can't afford their groceries. I think like overwhelmingly people are affording their groceries.
Human right, food. Do you believe that food is a basic human right that everyone should have a right to?
I don't think the term right is like meaningful either way. So like there are what I'll say is like there are some like libertarians out there who are like, negative rights are the only rights that matter. Like you can only have a right from government coercion. You can't have a right to anything that uses someone's labor. I don't believe in that, but I don't like strictly believe that like people have like an innate human right to food or whatever as well. I don't think rights. I kind of don't think like yeah, definitely. I just don't think like rights are like that. Meaning the concept of rights, like philosophically, it's kind of not very meaningful to me. What I'll say is I think we should have a redistributive system that ensures that everyone can get food. So we should have a program like food stamps. I would probably expand food stamps and make it like cash benefit. Like I think we should just do cash transfers. I don't see a need to have this weird type of like cash like benefit system to get people food or whatever. But like I want the government to ensure everyone has some minimum standard of living. I want the government to ensure everyone can afford, some minimum amount of food. But I think like I said, overwhelmingly, like if you just look at the percentage of their income that Americans are spending on food, that has gone down over time. And if you just look at the median earnings compared to the price of food, like the median earnings have outpaced.
That statistic is happening because people aren't able to eat as much because they're having to spend that money on other basic necessities. I mean, obviously that's a basic necessity, but I'm talking about like housing, I'm talking about transportation, things. I mean, people, like I said, are putting it on layaway.
No, I think you also see.
I would interpret. I mean, we don't know why they're spending less on food. I know you're interpreting it
the
way.
Number. The number of calories that people have consumed have certainly gone up significantly, over time. So presumably,
for calories.
well, presumably, like they're not buying. We're not buying less food in the sense of calories at the very least. I don't know. I don't have data on like maybe like I don't know what you would want to look at for that, like the weight of the food that we're buying or whatever. So that like Americans.
There's probably an array of possibilities. Sorry, I'm saying my point is that you're drawing one conclusion, which means that people are doing better. They're having a better life. Everything's right. But there's many reasons as to why that could be, and I don't think you're considering.
I don't think it's. I don't think it's crazy to say that if the number of calories the median American consuming is going up, and the number of or the percentage of income that they spend on food is going down.
You have that data that the calories are going up.
That the median American consumes more calories today than they did, for example, in the 70s. I believe I do. Somewhere in my notes have data that suggests that. We can probably go find that.
Okay, that's wild. But I would also argue that's because we're eating. I mean, this is going to get real off. I would argue that the food that we're eating is not,
Well, the food that we're eating is what consumers want, unfortunately. Now, like, we can say maybe they're not fully rational and there's negative externalities to being fat or whatever. But I don't think it's, the food that we get today is higher quality in a sense that, it's what people are demanding. But maybe not, maybe not.
And unfortunately, affordable food is often junk food, shit that's not good for our bodies. But yeah, this is getting really off topic.
Well, I think if it was, like, I don't know, would we say affordable food? I think just food in general has just gotten more affordable. Like the CPI tracks the price of essentially like all groceries and food away from home too, like at restaurants. And if you just like compare that to median earnings,
has actually had it gone up. Coffee's I think like 50% more than it was.
Well,
now.
Yeah, I don't disagree that tariffs are going to raise the price of a lot of the imported vegetables or whatever. But like, it's just look at like CPI, like we could just pull this up on Fred, which is I don't know if you know what that is, like an economic data site or whatever. Like CPI just has their basket of groceries, their basket of food away from home as well that they track. And if you just look at that line and how much that line goes up, index it to 2000 or whatever, and then compare it to, earnings of production and non-supervisory employees, that's representative of sort of the more average American job. Like the line for earnings of production and non-supervisory employees has outpaced the line for the cost of groceries and food away from home. Like, it's just obviously.
You're saying you're breaking it down. Your study is saying basically that you just looked up right now is saying that the cost of wages is going up much faster.
It's not even a study. It's just a data that like is reported every month. Like the CPI is just a measure of inflation that tracks a bunch of prices that is reported every month, has been reported, every month for the past 50 years or so, or longer than that, actually. And same thing with hourly earnings, right? Like, and we can just compare these things and see that, like, the price of food relative to income has just been falling. I think it increased a little bit in 2020. But yeah, obviously, it seems to be pretty indisputable, unless you have data to suggest otherwise, that wages have pretty greatly outpaced, and income generally has pretty greatly outpaced the price of food.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm not going to die on that hill, but I would say that, yeah, wages are still not. I mean, I know you keep saying they're going up and up and up. I mean, the minimum wage, I'm going to stick to that for sure, $7.25. Obviously, not everyone makes the minimum wage, as you said.
But it's less than 1% of people. It's like
185 times when CEOs are making astronomically more than the average American. I know you keep thinking it's enough and it stays going up. It's going up. I'm sure it is. I sure to God hope it's not going down. But it's not enough for people to survive, we shouldn't even just be looking at a survival level. I think that's another thing that's really, wrong with where we're headed right now in our country. I mean, if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the bottom level is just basics: food, house, shelter, safety. We're just there as a country. Most people are struggling for the first basic need, never mind self-actualization or anything like that.
Right. I do think, like, certainly, to the extent people struggle for basic needs, like, a decreasing percentage of people have been doing that, right? So, like, even if I say X amount of people in America or around the world, we're talking about global poverty earlier, are struggling for their basic needs, we have just seen the entire income distribution shift rightward. Like, we have just seen people in general, just get richer, and a smaller percentage of people are living on that, below $5 a day around the world, or, in America below whatever we think is the income that is representative of people struggling or whatever. But, like, again, so in America, $20 a day, I think is $20 a day is probably struggling in America. I don't know what that equates to yearly income, but certainly. Certainly, I think you can probably. What? Sorry?
I was saying, I think the line that you keep referencing is completely unfair when, $20 a day, as you just admitted, is still struggling. And I think that's what you said. It was like $3 was the marker for absolute poverty. I think we need to be looking at before absolute poverty. So how much would an average American need to make a day to not be anywhere near, absolute poverty? That should be our very last resort. And honestly,
I don't know what
we should have, and that's an insane marker.
I don't know what the number is there, but my point again, it's just that, no matter kind of where we draw this line, we have just seen the entire distribution shift rightward. So whether it's $5 a day, $3 a day, whatever, like, people, like, a decreasing percentage of this of people have been experiencing this, and we keep going back to the minimum wage, like that, again, very few people make minimum wage. And, the people who make minimum wage, also, that's not their only type of income, right? Like, the people who make minimum wage in the U.S. receive.
What happens when the minimum wage is based so low? People say, I'm just going to pay maybe $5 more than that, and I look like a really generous CEO. So do we then think about, okay, $13 an hour, is that a livable wage? No. So the higher that we raise the minimum wage, the higher the wages increase all along for every American worker. So that's why it's important to have a minimum wage and some regulations around that's realistic, because it actually does affect people who are not just making minimum wage.
I like, okay, conceptually, that's a thing that can happen. I think to the extent that, like, you see that so you could see a case where essentially there being a kind of higher floor on the minimum wage can give workers more bargaining power. I think there is a cost to that, and that we might see more disemployment because of that. You might see higher unemployment because of that. You might see lower hours because of that. But again, very few people work the minimum wage. And if we, say maybe the minimum wage, like, would just have some positive effect on it's like 1% of people work minimum wage. And like, let's say, even if I accept that like the minimum wage would have some impact on workers' bargaining power, I think like, are we affecting like 3% of people now? Like it seems unlikely to be that would be affecting even a big
it would affect
percent.
everybody but the CEO. I would imagine
No,
it affects
I
all
don't
the
think
ground workers but the CEO. Where what happens because what happens? So like you said, the minimum wage is the floor level. The people just kind of breaking in. Like you said, it's just more labor work. What happens at the next level? Okay, we figure out what the next pay rate for the next level up in our company is. Okay, then the next level after that, and they do base it on the. Not just what they think is, they don't just pull out a number. I just think that and maybe they do because you know what, they're CEOs, they probably do that for themselves. But they don't typically, I would assume, just not say, okay, I'm just going to think this person is worth $40 an hour. No, they base it of the metrics of where the bottom starts, the next level, the next level, the next level.
I think you would, so potentially you would see like the workers whose next best option is a minimum wage job, like they would have more bargaining power. But for people whose next best option isn't a minimum wage job, like I don't think you would see their pay affected essentially at all. Like I don't think most people are like basing their entire pay schedule off of this. I think pay is primarily based on productivity as the upper bound, like your margin of revenue product is the upper bound for how much you can be compensated before it's unprofitable to hire you. And then the lower bound is your next best alternative. So you're right. For people who don't make minimum wage, but whose next best option is a minimum wage job, if you raise the minimum wage, you might see the lower bound increase. But for people whose next best option isn't affected by the minimum wage, you would not necessarily see their wages increase because their pay schedule is not simply based on that. And again, this like either way, this is a very low percentage of the population you're affecting. And I think if you just look at the median, like
what the next best option matter too. Number one, I just I don't think that's true at all. But just to start with, the people who are the next level, like you said, they matter. Do they not deserve do people at minimum wage not deserve a fair rate? Even though you said it's like 1%, do those, which I don't know, I would have to check that statistic
I think deserve
myself. They deserve a better wage. And then on top of that, the next level up, that's a whole nother round of people who deserve to have a livable wage. To say unskilled people or teenagers or whatever still don't. I mean, our teenagers, are they going to, number one, I don't think that's true that minimum wage is just teenagers. Second off,
I don't think it's just teenagers, but I think
do we want to make sure that teenagers can just like never move out of their parents' house? Do we want to make sure that that's the way that we start our like children into this world? But also, yes, then the next level, like you said, and is absolutely entirely true. They look at what everybody's getting paid in the company, and you think they're just going. I think I can imagine at the top, like you said, there's like a what can the company afford, what not, how can we still make profit? And I would imagine like the CEOs, like you said, they kind of just probably say, this is what I want to make, 285 times more the average than the average American. They're not basing theirs off the minimum wage. They don't give a rat's ass about that. But the workers absolutely are still being affected because they look at the next level down. Okay, we're paying the next level down in this, and so
right. I don't think that's how. Like I don't see evidence that's how most compensation works, right? I think the next best alternative for people is relevant, but for a lot of people, the next best alternative is not a minimum wage job. Again, a lot of these people aren't even like working. Like the point is, like I said, generally, like the living waging, like it's going to affect a pretty small percentage of workers, and I think there's potential concerns about disemployment from that. I think more importantly, again, I think it was like the third time I mentioned it, whatever. Like if you just look at the income of people, even in the bottom 20% of Americans, right? Even or the bottom 25% or whatever, like of Americans, like that, just has been going up over time, despite the fact that minimum wage has stayed the same. Like you do just see the bottom quintile of Americans making more and more money every year, right? It's been relatively consistently going up, and especially because like a lot some of the income.
Like 25 cents. What is your system? I mean, obviously we can't measure that, but I also want to point that out. We see it going up.
What do you mean? We can.
Much more, Do you have that statistic?
Yeah, I mean, so it depends. So there's different, there's different assumptions you can make, but But the
See,
data
that's what
I've
that's what
seen suggests that like
you're
you've
assuming
seen
that it's going
roughly.
up to this rate that's so affordable and just making, why are people, like everyone should be fine. You're assuming that because maybe they get a 25-cent pay raise.
No, 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 no.
Some people,
I mean,
15% pay raise. If it's
I'm
going up, then it looks good on paper, but is it really good for the average American? Are people not
yeah.
struggling?
I mean, that's what
I don't know about you. There's people struggling all around me.
right. So I mean, I'm looking at real income that's like adjusted for inflation, and I think you've roughly seen, even for the bottom quintile, like if you look at like after tax income, I think you've seen like over like a 20% increase over the last like four or over the last like 4 decades or whatever. Like I can pull up exact data, and like you might disagree with me on what assumptions we should make and what types of income we should include, but that I think roughly you've seen that. Like you've just seen, like this is a graph like looking at percentage change since 1967.
Have the data of how much CEOs have given themselves a raise?
Well, you say giving themselves a raise. We were talking about this earlier. Like I think,
Yeah.
like I said,
because we keep talking about.
So here's a graph that is looking at.
Or should I say bonuses? There we go. Bonuses.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have that movement?
I think when you look at this is like I designed a graph looking at the percentage change in income of after tax income for like each quintile. You can see actually the bottom quintile since 1947 has seen sort of the highest percentage increase in that time period. Now the top has probably seen like more in absolute terms. But like it just as a percentage, like the rate of after tax income for the poor has grown quite a bit more, simply because the amount of the amount of social spending that we do in the U.S. has just grown a lot, right? Like I think we spend like close to 20% of our I think it's like 18% of GDP or something like on social spending in total. And like here are just like some graphs from like there's an economist named David Splinter whose work I like. He has like a number of papers. Like this is just a graph that he has of the after tax income like by quintile, and like you can see, it's been rising for every quintile, including the bottom quintile, including the bottom 25% of Americans. Like that's, that seems relevant.
So just really quick question, how you just said that it feels like probably, when the CEOs get their raise or whatever, it's bigger because obviously a percentage is bigger when the number is higher, right? Do you think that's fair? Do you think that's okay that, when the CEO, they can get billions of dollars, in a pay raise, but then the average American.
So I think the percentage should matter, right? I do think the percentage
should be unified across the board when it actualizes as a much higher dollar amount than a percentage.
I think the relative amount does matter, right? I mean, that's going to matter for like that is also going to have implications on wealth inequality, sort of the percentage growth and everything. But like, I think that's what I'm saying. I think more importantly, like like I said earlier, and like you kind of got it earlier, like there are just like positive sum transactions. So it can be the case that maybe like absolute, CEO pay increases, by more than the absolute income for the bottom quintile or whatever. But like if both quintiles just overall are better off, like that's a good thing, right? Like it is a very good thing that we see even the bottom 20% of Americans, their incomes continually rising. That is a very good thing that we see that. And I think it's silly to assume that just because I don't think we should discount those gains just because the absolute number of pay for CEOs has gone up over time. Like it seems silly to discount those, especially when, like I said earlier, I don't think it's zero sum. And I think there are cases where
we do need to also factor in, okay, everything's rising. I know you're saying inflation, whatnot, but like I said,
well, this is adjusted for
you also
that.
said yourself, you said housing markets. There's the issues within that. And so I think there's just a lot of things that aren't being factored. It's included in there?
Yeah, that's included. That's included in measures of inflation. They include housing costs in that, right?
Well, I agree that we should be acknowledging, rises, but I'm going to keep pushing back that it's absolutely not enough for the average American. And I think if anything, the average American should have a bigger pay raise than the CEO, considering the actual sum.
What do you mean the actual sum? Like they should have a bigger percentage change?
Absolutely, yes.
So I think right. I mean, I think like there is a graph. I think when you include government benefits, like you can actually reach a conclusion that for like the bottom quintile, they have kind of seen like a higher percentage change than like the top quintile because of how high of government benefits a lot of people at the bottom quintile get. A lot of they receive a lot of Medicaid, they receive a lot of food stamps, they receive a lot of those government benefits, all the stuff, Patrick Bet David hates.
Are we also talking about the corporate subsidies and all the handouts that the wealthy get? Are they also factoring in the government help that they're getting? Like, for example, Elon Musk getting $8 a day. Are we factoring that in as well? I mean, is that...
Yeah, this is after, like, the stuff I sent is looking at after tax income. So any transfers that rich people get
I don't
know would be...
So forgive me if I'm not able to reference what
you're
sending me.
Okay, you're good. Sure. I mean, that's looking at after tax transfers. So like any transfers rich people would get, are included in that. Now, like I think just like if there are just contracts or whatever
you can say that with a straight face. You can say that with a straight face, Jared. That this is okay. That, for example, Elon Musk is getting $8 million a day, and everyone else is fine.
What do you mean by he's getting Usually when people talk about this stuff, they just mean like Elon Musk like got a contract from NASA to do stuff, and I don't think that's like strictly. I don't think that's a subsidy in the same way that like food stamps is a subsidy. Now the income Elon Musk gets from that government contract is included in the measures I sent, and any transfers that he does get are included in the measures that I sent, as well as, the taxes that he pays, the taxes that rich people pay in general, because they do tend to pay, obviously, a higher tax rate than a lot of people in the middle and lower classes, right? This is looking at after taxes and transfers and sort of the net payment
for... They should pay a higher tax rate, but it's not high enough. They should absolutely pay a higher tax rate, because they make astronomically more tax.
I think they should pay a higher...
Anybody that doesn't... The average American would say that. I don't think it's very fair or very American to say that anyone who is going to be the world's next trillionaire should pay anything near an average American.
I mean, I think if you look at the data, most of the data I've seen suggests that they do already pay quite a high tax rate. And it seems like our tax system's actually been moving.
Not able to you're sending.
Not what, sorry?
Can you tell me what you're referencing? What's this percentage you're referencing?
Yeah, I think if you look at the effective rates from David Splinter and the economist I was citing earlier, I think he finds that they pay like over a 40% effective rate. I think even if you look at data from like Saez and Zuckman, who are like two like left-leaning economists that people cite a lot because they talk a lot about income inequality and stuff. Even they, I think, show that like the top 0.1% or 1%, pay an effective tax rate of over 30% today, which I like, maybe you don't think that's high enough still, but that is still higher than the median American or the, middle class Americans that we might be concerned about. And typically people in the bottom, like 40% of America actually get like net transfers from the government. They might pay taxes, but they get more benefits from the government than they, pay paying taxes. So like, I think, regardless of who you trust there.
They try to make themselves look cash poor because they just borrow basically on their stocks instead of selling them. And so they make themselves look cash poor, and they find loopholes and ways, stash their money in the Cayman Islands, whatnot. They are not paying enough, and they are dodging taxes. Absolutely. And I would agree with you. I mean, you not with you, but what you said about me, absolutely. I still think that's not enough percent. I think there needs to be a wealth tax, an individual wealth tax as well, that we don't have. And that's where we're just going to disagree. That
Okay. Well, I mean, I think so. The tax system I would advocate, I think would actually address a lot of those issues. I think I would switch to a destination-based tax that would, tax regardless of where, that were taxed based on where you consume instead of, just kind of where you place your money or where you happen to, headquarter your company or whatever. And I think I would also switch to a consumption tax system, which would, tax anything you consume, regardless of whether you're consuming it with money from a loan or, money you just had in your bank account. So that would address, to the extent that whatever, bargaining against stock loophole exists, that would address that issue. Now, also, people do have to pay back that loan with after-tax money, right? Now, some rich people might get preferable treatment from banks or whatever because they have like good credit and they're rich. And they can put up good collateral, but that's because that's because they can put up good collateral and because they're rich and have good credit and stuff. I don't think it's like particularly unfair. Yeah. But they still have to pay back that loan with after-tax money. So that is still like tax at the end of the day. I also I just think like I said, I think our tax system already does an okay job at this. Like I think it even according to like pretty left-wing economists who talk about this a lot, like you do see rich people paying pretty high effective tax rates. Sometimes like I think if you look at the data from like Science and Zuckman, they'll say like sort of the top like 400 richest people can sometimes pay a lower effective tax rate than like the median American because they have so much unrealized income that isn't taxed. But I think, I think broadly there just is benefits from, the type of savings, the type of investments that we see rich people doing. And again, I don't think it's a zero sum thing. So like, I think, it could be the case that like the rich are, getting richer. Like I agree, like that is a thing that is happening. Like these people are making a lot of money. I just, for one, don't think it's like that out of line with what we've seen historically. Again, I don't think wealth inequalities increased that significantly in the U.S. if you look at the data from David Splinter. Mm-hmm. And there are sort of instrumental benefits to that in that, they are doing innovation that helps consumers. They are doing investments that help the overall growth of the economy. And that is partly why you see growth in America being really high. That's why you see growth in incomes, even for the bottom quintile, being, pretty high. That's why, you see America has so much innovation and so much success that I think even like European countries don't necessarily have a lot of times. Like Europe does not have a big tech sector. Europe does not have as high.
China's crushing us. What do you mean? China is literally crushing us. We are actually like stuck in fucking time with innovation when it comes to AI. Mm-hmm. Also, I'm going to agree that this AI innovation is actually like very helpful to consumers or the average American. But no, we are not. We are very much behind in a lot of these countries. Well, I'd say China specifically, they are crushing us in the AI and the solar renewable energy field. Absolutely. By 2030,
I think China builds more solar, but I don't know. To me,
by 2030, China to create more renewable energy than the entire country of America.
So I think China does a better job. I think China does a better job at deploying a lot of their technology. I don't think we actually see as much innovation from China as from the U.S. I think that might change a little bit in some sectors because of the Big Beautiful Bill and the cuts to things like the NIH and stuff or whatever. But I think like, a lot of the success in China with regards to innovation and stuff is attributable to, by the way, their liberalization, the fact that they did liberalize, the fact that they did privatize parts of their economy. They did do a lot of these things that are like more like capitalist, based reforms or whatever. But there's
still have a lot of the social, foundations and whatnot.
I mean, I agree. I just also think like, that is the thing that oftentimes like slows down their growth. Like I think if you compare the performance of state-owned enterprises in China to the performance of privatized enterprises in China, you typically find that state-owned enterprises perform worse. And this might be a good chance to ask, just like,
a lot of times with that, it's because they're forced to meet quotas instead of coming up with new ideas and more innovations. So I do think that we have to have those like socialistic type things, but yeah, absolutely, you can't get lost in the fact and be complicit, and not making new strides to something new.
So this might be a good chance to ask then. Like, I'm just curious, like when you I'm just curious, like what exactly type system you advocate for. Considering like, I mean, you did just mention like you don't necessarily prefer China's system of having quotas for things or whatever. So like when you say you want a more like democratic social system, like what are the main things that we're doing to get there? Like, are we doing co-ops? Are we doing state ownership of most things? Are we doing...
Yeah, so I think there needs to be more public ownership. I mean, I would associate right now myself as a democratic socialist, and with that, there is still a private sector. I don't think that's my end game, and that's what I would actually like to be, in the future. But I think right now, realistically, democratic socialism. So that means more publicly owned things, more co-ops, transportation to be publicly owned, internet, healthcare, school, trade schools as well, even prisons. I mean, I think that AI should be publicly owned as well, because what's going to happen if it's not working for the people, it's just going to be bettering one person at the top. And like I said, CEOs have already come out and saying they can't wait to replace the workers. So what's going to happen? We're going to have massive job losses. Anyways, I digress.
Well, I mean, I think if you... So, I mean, it seems like you just acknowledge like one potential problem with public ownership is that we kind of don't see the same incentives, and you kind of do see sometimes inefficient central planning from the government when they do things like, mandate certain quotas or whatever. And I think that's something like largely the private market avoids.
Any system can fail though, right? Like capitalism can fail. I mean, there can be authoritarian...
I agree conceptually any system can fail. The relevant thing is that like, I think we have first of all, I think we just have I think there's, decently good empirical evidence.
We need to know that we can fail, but we have social safety nets and basic human rights, because capitalism can fail. However, we do not have as many social safety nets, basic human rights. And I know you don't like that word, but I do, because I do believe that we should be a right to have, food, to have a house, to be able to have an education. In the best country of the world, we should have these basic necessities, not as a privilege, not just for the people who can afford it. And so, yeah, I think we need to be doing more. The US already
does that to some extent, but I agree there should be like a safety net. I just think like I would have that done in what I consider an economically efficient way of primarily efficient taxes that only really affect consumption, and essentially redistribution that is typically going to be more cash benefits than a lot of this, than a lot of public ownership or whatever. So I agree, like it is possible for capitalism to quote unquote fail. I think there are capitalist countries that just don't have very good institutions that have like fallen apart or failed or whatever. But I think we have very good reasons to believe generally that like markets and the price system are just a very effective way at allocating resources, right? Like the profit and loss motive gives you good incentives to use resources in the most efficient way, for everyone to allocate resources in the most efficient way. The price mechanism is very good at conveying information to people and, conveying localized information to everyone, information that a central planner could almost never collect or whatever. And even if they did collect, it would just lead to the same outcome as the market outcome anyways. Does a very good job at, letting consumers and everyone, producers even convey their preferences to producers of the stuff that they need to buy based on how much they're willing to pay for it. Like we have very good reasons conceptually to believe that the market and price system is like very good at its job. And it seems like most of the empirical evidence confirms that, private ownership and a market-based system tend to just have more positive effects, tend to have higher growth rates than the type of like socialistic systems, that we see in other countries a lot of times. So I think
I'm not completely against a mixed economy at this point in time. I think we have to take steps. I do see that there's benefits in both mixed economy situations, but yeah, there needs to be more regulations. You said a lot. I have a hard time unpacking every point you're saying because you talk fast and you say a lot, but
yeah, sorry. But...
that's all right. You say incentive, right? A lot of the capitalism, capitalistic mind, incentive is basically fear-based. It's basically, if you don't make enough money, you're going to be homeless, you're going to have no food, whatnot. It's a fear-based incentive, right?
I mean, not always. So under like my ideal system, there would be some minimum.
Competition or fear is basically the capitalist mindset.
Competition is, I think, a big part of it. I think it's a positive effect of it. I think there's generally positive to that. So, to be clear, under my system, like everyone would be insured like some minimum amount of food in effect, because they would receive transfers from the government if they were, if they were poor enough. But like I do. For example, like this is sort of the meme example, like, it gets brought up a lot of times or whatever. Like, I think Ludwig von Mises, he's an Austrian dude. I think this was his example. Like if we just have a company that's trying to build a railroad, right? And, they have to decide whether or not to go around the mountain and use more rail, or to go through a mountain and use more like engineering and like concrete to build the tunnel or whatever. A capitalist market-based system makes this decision very easy. You just use whatever has the lowest price, right? You just do whatever has the lowest cost. And the best thing is, by doing so, you're also furthering the social goal, because, by doing the thing that has the lower cost, by choosing the resources that are more abundant, you're sort of freeing up the resources that are less abundant for other people to use in sort of more productive ways, for other people to use because they value those resources more enough to, pay for them because they need them more.
Well, a lot of times,
types
always the most sustainable thing. I mean, the cheaper thing isn't always the most sustainable thing, the most beneficial for our planet, for the best of our people. It's really based on the money.
I agree.
There is value in that. I think we need to start to slowly not just see that it's not all about the money, because there are other factors that matter to people's life, to this planet, and so that's where I think we have to not just be so money.
So there can be like externalities that like we should care about, and like money might not be the only thing that matters, but I think the relevant thing here is that like a market mechanism and a price mechanism makes the decision very easy. You don't have to have much information. You just do what has the lower cost, and that is conveying all the relevant information to you. And
that can be a problem. That can be a problem, though. That's the thing.
That it's not. I agree that can be a problem, but I think the cases where that is a problem.
You look at the fossil fuel industry, we know that's not good for the planet.
Well, that's obviously like a case of an externality, right. And I agree. Like we should be taxing negative externalities. Like we should be doing a carbon tax. I don't think that's
doing things. We're creating things not just based on money. Our public transportation system would not be a fucking joke like it is. I mean, and that's better for the environment, but there's not as much money to make there. There's not as much capital to make, since we're not doing it. So these things happen much more.
Again, if there's, there are, negative externalities, especially with the environment and carbon and stuff, that are not like priced into the market, right? So the solution to that most of the time is, a tax on carbon, and or like some type of cap and like trade scheme where we say where we sell pollution permits or whatever, and companies can trade pollution permits amongst themselves or whatever. So I think that like there are solutions to that are still like market oriented, or like happen under a capitalist system. And I don't see necessarily how, like, certainly like worker co-ops are not necessarily going to internalize that externality amongst themselves. Now you can, if you had like a state-owned enterprises or whatever, like I guess you could certainly like mandate like certain state-owned enterprises sort of take into account the effects of carbon or whatever. But I think there are still reasons to believe that just doing a tax on carbon would be more efficient than having like a bunch of state-owned enterprises who all individually like make the consideration about have these considerations for carbon emissions or whatever.
So do you think they would actually make a tax on carbon? That's actually realistic.
I don't think it's that unlikely. I think there are other countries that have already done it, right? Hasn't Canada done it?
Yes. Well, I'm sure, but yeah. we are.
Yeah, so I don't think it's that unlikely.
Well,
I don't think it's.
Go ahead.
I don't think it's impossible that we would see a tax on carbon, but I think, like, more importantly, again, it's just that, like, you know, this is pretty clearly something that a holistically capitalist system can still solve for, is externalities. Is you tax carbon, you tax these externalities.
Not going to get it to stop as fast as we need it to get to stop. Tax on carbon is not going to get it.
I don't know.
To stop as fast as we need it.
I don't know if that's true. I don't know how we would determine if that's true. I think if you
going to happen, that's probably the next best step, because let's be honest, I don't see our country going, you know, socialist anytime soon. It's still got pretty bad rap. So I do agree that that could probably happen faster, but is it the right way? I would say no. I would say more of a publicly owning the fossil fuel industry, everyone having a vote on what happens in the planet. I think that would be a much better way than just trusting that a CEO isn't going to pay a little bit more tax and then hike up the prices of gas for everyone else to pay.
Well, the relevant thing is under our capitalist system, obviously, our carbon tax is the thing that gives them the incentive to emit, you know, less carbon. I think if you had sort of this, you know, public ownership of a fossil fuel industry, I mean, for one, I think you would see
we tax more, they charge the people more. When we tax more, and then we're seeing that with tariffs as well.
I agree.
The average American has to cut the loss. So when you just throw a tax on everything, or, you know, I'm sure the CEOs are like, oh, that sucks. But where are we going to make up that profit? Somewhere else, because we are extremely profit driven, not people driven.
Okay, so I agree. Like, a lot of times, taxes, the incidence is going to be on consumers. Now, I think there are taxes that, you know, might be able to avoid that at least somewhat. But, like, you know, the relevant thing is, like, carbon taxes, which I'm sure some of the incidents, if not most of the incidents of carbon taxes, is on the consumers. The relevant thing is simply that, like, you know, we're pricing in the cost of emissions, right? Like, even if the end cost is on the consumer sometimes, right? Like, that's just a consumer paying for, you know, the emissions that, you know, their consumption is going to affect, right? Like, we're pricing in that externality. I think that's the relevant thing that we're trying to address there.
It should be put on the consumer to pay because they're using it.
I mean,
that's what you're saying, like their consumption. Is that what you're?
So if our goal is simply to minimize the negative externalities associated with emitting carbon, sort of the incidence of who the tax is on doesn't really matter, because either way you're going to reduce the emissions of carbon. Now, holistically, you know, we should have a progressive tax system, I think.
I care about the average American. But it does matter because I cared about the average American. So another financial strain on the average American who is making 285 times less than the CEO pick up that paycheck.
So I think, you know, like I said, holistically, we should still have a progressive tax system. And I think, obviously, like, you can, you know, have
you're like the poorest one at the table, and it's like you're the poorest one at the dinner table, and then all of your really elite rich friends are like, hey, you cover the bill. Thanks. That's how I see it.
I mean, again, like, holistically, you can have a progressive tax system still, and, you know, maintain and still have a carbon tax, even if the incidence falls on consumers at least some of the time. You know, you could just have other progressive taxes and transfers to essentially make up for that. The thing that we're trying to address with a carbon tax is simply the emissions part. We're not, you know, I don't see any need for a carbon tax to be progressive when we can.
That's the thing. It does tie in together, because what is an injustice to the climate, to the world, oftentimes is injustice to the people. It does matter to talk about this. You can.
Well, yeah, but it has negative effects insofar as people emit carbon, right? And the relevant thing with the carbon tax is it's going to make it more expensive to emit carbon.
No, I agree. But the thing is, not everybody. So the country needs to put in place more incentives, right, to do solar, to do clean energy. But we're also not doing that. So what's going to happen is people can't afford to go buy a new car. They have no choice but to emit carbon because we are not setting them up for success. So I think if we have, maybe your plan could work if we have more incentives and more, you know, it's like clearly people are choosing not to do this just because they want to drive their fucking diesel truck. You know, they don't want to do stupid green energy or whatever. But I think that not everyone has the opportunities to do that. And we're not putting enough things in place for them where they can. The average American, whereas the CEOs, the rich people they do have the means to do these things. They know what they're doing. They can afford to make the changes, but they're not, mostly because it's profitable for them the way it is. But that's what I'm saying.
They don't have
I think that the
incentive to.
Go ahead. What was that?
Obviously, CEOs don't have an incentive to do that. The point of the carbon tax is to make it so they would have an incentive to switch away from carbon emitting technologies.
Listen, we need to stop it at all costs. I do think if it's publicly owned, it's going to be better because it's not going to affect the average American. And what's going to happen is, there's going to be this like carbon tax. Hopefully more people can afford to switch over, but what's realistically going to happen is people are going to suffer because there's not going to be any like ways to help these people switch over.
I think if you had public ownership of the entire fossil fuel industry, I think you'd see like a massive, depending on how it's managed, depending on what you mean by public ownership. And I mean, you're talking about like everyone getting a vote earlier. Like, I think you would probably see a pretty massive free riding problem with that. Like, it's just not worth it individually in that case for like anyone to, do the research as to how fossil fuel companies should be managed, especially when they. Right. I mean, I guess if you. There might be some.
We vote our politicians, and so they're representing the public. But
even then, there's still definitely a potential like free rider problem there. It might not be as big as if you like literally gave everyone in the country a vote as to how to manage a fossil fuel company.
Well, I also believe we need campaign finance reform, right? So if we have politicians in there who are not being bought out by lobbyists, by the ultra-rich elites, they're going to be in there advocating for the people and not necessarily for their mega rich donors. So I understand there's a lot of moving parts that have to happen for this, democratic socialist vision. So, it's easy to pick out one part. Well, if we don't reform this, but yes. And if it's ran by the government, and then we have people who are not being bought out, then yes, it's going to advocate for the people, for the betterment of the world, not just for capital.
Okay. Right. So I think there are reasons to believe a carbon tax would be more efficient than like public ownership. The money in politics thing is a different conversation or whatever. But I do think if you saw public ownership, there might be models of public ownership that are okay, but if you're saying like the government should have like enough of a stake in the fossil fuel industry to be able to like mandate certain things, I think you probably would see issues with how the government, is able to manage that fossil fuel company. I think historically, publicly owned companies, state-owned enterprises, are simply don't tend to be managed as efficiently as private enterprises. I think you would probably see free rider problems. You would probably see principal agent problems. I think you wouldn't even see necessarily the same all else equal, like a state-owned government enterprise would still have the same incentive to pollute, or a worker co-op as well would still have the same incentive to pollute. In that world, we're simply essentially just mandating that we have these type of like social considerations when we order the state-owned enterprise to do things.
Why would they have the same incentive to pollute?
The government state-owned enterprise. So, if we're still setting them up as a profit maximizing like industry, right? I understand you would have considerations.
Government is not a profit organization. That's why it's
not always. You can have state-owned enterprises. So would we have so public ownership doesn't necessarily always entail actual government control or action of the company. Like you can have publicly owned companies or whatever that are managed technocratically, are managed by industry professionals and are still set up with a profit maximizing goal.
Is that talking about subcontracting, not actual government?
No, you see, so you could have a, for example, there's a person I used to talk to. His name's O'Connor Boy. For example, he was a socialist, as he called himself a socialist. He would say we should essentially have government-owned holding corporations And these like holding corporations would be like essentially independent companies that would just invest in, you know, other companies, but the holding corporations themselves would be publicly owned. So whenever they bought shares in a company or whatever, you know, they would be, that company would be partially publicly owned. It's just that this holding corporation, it is still like a profit maximizing industry, investing in other profit maximizing industries. Is simply at the end of the day publicly owned, so its profits can be used for, you know, the government, for the common good, or for like, you know, transfers to people or whatever. So you know, you could have a system of public ownership where you don't see the government like mandating certain you know, certain things or whatever. I think that's the best model of public ownership. I still have issues with it. But if we're doing a type of government ownership, a type of public ownership, where we are saying we have to mandate certain requirements with regards to the environment, certain requirements with regards to, you know, whatever social goal we want to meet, I think you are going to see in that world like a lot of issues with that management, because I think, you know, generally the government doesn't have the same stake necessarily that the, you know, regular shareholders would have, in the sense that like or like the same incentives really with regards to profit maximization and using resources efficiently. I think you're going to see
so you think
sort
the
of
only
principal
way,
agent problems.
I guess I've been meaning to say this. So yeah, it seems like you truly believe the only incentive is profit. Am I correct?
I mean, I don't think that's I don't know what you mean by the only incentive. I think the reason why the profit motive tends to be good is it tends to incentivize using resources efficiently. It tends to incentivize innovation. It tends to incentivize things overall that I think are really good. I don't think it's like the only incentive people always like have all the time. Like people do things, like people volunteer. That's not necessarily motivated by a profit motive or anything. But I do think like that it is the,
you know, the strongest.
I think it's typically the strongest, and I think it's generally a good thing. I think the profit motive generally is good. To the extent that there are externalities, you can price them in so it aligns with the profit motive.
That leads to exploitation. The profit motive leads to exploitation. It leads to, like I said, I mean, let's just talk about like human psychology, right? Like if you're like profit motive, and you're like, I have to work because otherwise I will be homeless. Otherwise I will have no food to feed my kids. I won't have clothes on my back. I mean, I'm a parent and I can speak to that. I don't like that being motive.
I mean, I think you...
I don't want to have that. I mean, I would like, I want to create, I want to be a part of a society. I want to help people. I want to help, you know, further this world. I want to make sure that we don't just mass destruct this fucking planet. So I think that there is that. I mean, there is truth in what you're saying. It is a motive, and it's kind of working, but it's not.
Well, I mean, I think it works. Like you know,
the people get exploited. It leads to people exploitation. It leads to people being, like you said, how you were saying that, yeah, sometimes like corners get cuts, sustainability, things like that are not generally for
I think
the
sometimes
best
there are
for the planet.
externalities.
Yes, there you go. That's what you said. Yes, and it's not.
Yeah,
and it's happening.
So
and those.
I mean, you know, any like open any like economics textbook, you know, they'll tell you like, oh, markets are so great and everything, but sometimes we should be concerned with externalities, right? With things that affect other people, but are not, you know, priced in to the market. That is an issue. And the appropriate response, in my opinion, is to price it into the market so companies have an incentive to not pollute more, right? Like that is the appropriate response to me, because generally when we do things like public ownership, we don't see positive effects from it because incentives are not aligned in the same way that they typically are with private industries. And I guess like, you know, that like exploitation point,
like people have much more of if we talk about co-ops, for example, if we were talking, you know, public ownership, people have more of a stake in the company. They feel more involved. They feel more passionate. They don't feel like they're just kind of going through the motions. So no, and they oftentimes public ownership pays better than, I mean, a lot of these co-ops, they pay much higher wages. Yeah.
So co-ops aren't necessarily public ownership. I'll get to that in a second. I do just want to comment on like the exploitation point. So I get like in my world, we would have kind of a minimum standard of living. Like you would have a government like insured like UBI, you would have like maybe some type of, you know, public health insurance or whatever, that would ensure like some minimum. So like, you know, your choice would not literally be work or starve. If you couldn't find a job for whatever reason, like you would be guaranteed some minimum standard of life. But I think, you know, the round thing is that employees tend to have multiple options for employers, right? Like there's competition between employers with regards to, you know, the workers they hire, and that tends to, you know, lead to positive outcomes for workers, you know, and they have a variety of choices of, you know, where to work. I think that's the, you know, good thing from the market system that makes it not super exploitative, at least all the time. But, you know, on like the co-ops point, so I think co-ops would have the same incentive to pollute and stuff. They would still have the same incentives regarding all these externalities. Now, you're right in that there may be some like psychological benefits to working in a co-op because people have a stake in the company. And you're right in that co-ops tend to have more egalitarian like wage schedules or whatever. I don't think there are other issues you run in a co-op. So on that egalitarian, you know, wage schedule, I think there's evidence from both co-ops and unions that when you have those, you tend to see what's called brain drain. So, you know, people who it would be highly compensated at other companies, at other, you know, private enterprises because, you know, they are highly skilled because they have higher productivity than most of the other workers. If their wages are compressed by the fact that, you know, the other members of the co-op are essentially voting their wages down, you know, they will go to other countries. They will go to other, they will go to other private companies. You see that in Uruguay, and you see that even in unions in America. And like, I think I don't know how much you want to talk about co-ops. I don't know how much you support them, but I think you run into broadly just allocative issues with regards to, you know, companies not being able to accept labor without accepting capital, or accepting capital without accepting labor. I think there are just broad efficiency issues with that.
How so?
Right. So like, you know, obviously some firms are going to like benefit a lot more kind of on the margin from accepting large amounts of capital. And some firms are going to, you know, benefit sort of on the margin from accepting, you know, lots of labor. So like startup companies don't necessarily need a ton of people working at their company, but a lot of times they do need sort of a lot of capital, a lot of equity financing, a lot of money from investors to, you know, make their product or whatever. Under certain, you know, there are different models of co-ops or whatever. Under co-ops, like presumably, you know, you can't really give up stake in your company without, you know, hiring more people. Like the only way you can kind of like sell shares or whatever, or sell maybe, you know, majority of your shares is if you also hire people to go along with it. If you also accept labor to go along with it. You also hire laborers who own those shares. So you're going to lead to, like I said, allocative issues where companies just aren't able to effectively allocate labor and capital because of that.
Well, they don't know. You don't have to do the labor per se. You just have to buy in to these co-ops, basically. Not everybody who's part of. I'm not sure if that's what you meant, but that's what it sounded like to me. You don't have to be like a grocery store.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of, so the buying in is an issue too with transaction cost, which I can talk about too. But my point is that we essentially
everyone has a vote. Everybody.
Right. So my point is, like, you know, startups right now, for example, like Silicon Valley startup or whatever, when they accept money from an investor, right? The investor like gives them a fuck ton of money, and, you know, in return, the investor gets ownership of that company, right? They get a stake in that company. Under a co-op model, that'd be very hard to do, considering, like, you know, the whole point is that people outside the company don't necessarily have control of the company, right? The workers are the ones with control. So if I want to raise capital, I could, like you said, you know, have someone buy in, but that's exactly my point. I have to accept labor along with capital. I can't just accept capital. And conversely, there's other like labor intensive tasks where you might not need capital, but you need labor. And in order to accept the labor, I also have to buy capital. There's a lot of, for example, startups tend to be, you know, very capital intensive. Also, her video's not showing. I know, chat. I think it's broke. I don't know if there's anything we can do about that. I think it might just be fucked. You know, startups tend to be a very capital intensive industry in that they, like I said, you know, they want to raise a ton of money to do their startup or whatever, but they don't necessarily need labor to do that. So a big like Silicon Valley tech startup or whatever probably needs a lot of money to do their sort of initial upfront investment stuff. But they don't need labor. If you do a co-op system, exactly what you're talking about. People have to buy in. I can't really accept money. I can't sell equity in my company without someone coming in to do labor. But, I don't need labor. I don't get the best use of labor on the margin. Someone else has the best use of labor on the margin. And under a co-op system, you're going to have a lot of issues with that type of allocative efficiency.
I see. But how... So people aren't specifically like, oh, I'm trying to sell my stake in this. People are more invested in the company itself. Can you hear me? It's kind of being weird internet. Let me know if you can't hear me at any point.
Yeah, I can hear you. I don't think I'll be able to see you, unfortunately, but.
Oh, well, I know we're like getting pretty close to being overtime anyways, but we'll just like wrap it up. As I was saying, I
have by the way, there's one other person who, for whatever reason, wants to talk to you. I don't want to like, I don't want to surprise you or like dogpile you or anything. I don't really know why he wants to talk to you so badly exactly, but.
Oh my gosh, I'm gonna say no to that because I am a woman and I don't know
based. Okay.
What kind of
that makes sense.
Be a creepy thing. It could be like let's talk politics, but it could be a creepy thing. So I'm just gonna say no to that.
Valid. Okay.
My point was basically that a lot of times with these people's in co-ops, they're not necessarily trying to sell their stakes in it. They typically are much more invested in the company because it's more of a communal type thing, and they feel more purpose towards it. Whereas in the capitalistic society, when they're investors, obviously they're selling it if it's not making them enough money, right? That's what it is at the end of the day. So I think that we won't run into that problem as much because we are not having, there's not as much emotional investment in it versus financial investment.
So it might depend.
Right,
there kind of might be people, even in a market system, and I think this is kind of why you see co-ops even today, that are just invested in the idea of having a co-op in a common good or whatever. My point is simply like to the extent that we like mandate co-ops, or to the extent that we heavily like artificially incentivize co-ops, you're going to see issues with companies that need a lot of capital or have the best use of capital, the best use of investment on the margin. They can't actually get capital without also taking in labor when they don't have the best use of labor on the margin. So you're going to get allocative inefficiency because companies that don't have the best use of capital on the margin are not going to get as much capital as they need. Companies that don't have the best use of labor on the margin are not going to get the labor that they need.
Are you trying to say, so for the people who are not economists here, are you trying to say that they don't make as much money because they're a co-op?
No. They can. There is an issue there associated with they don't maximize for total output. They maximize for output per worker, and I think that's also tends to be inefficient. My point is simply, but like broadly speaking, under a market system, as a laborer, I'm just going to go where I can get the highest return from my labor, and in a market-based system, that's going to align with where my labor is sort of most valuable, right? Which firm can on the margin, meaning with on the margin, this means like just with one additional worker, right? Which firm with one additional worker can produce the most output. With co-ops, however, you're going to run into issues in that we're going to get to, we're not going to see that because, for example, if a firm wants to raise capital, even if they don't need labor, they're kind of forced to accept labor. They can't raise money from investors outside of the company most of the time because that would require selling stake in their company. The whole point of a co-op is to not have outside ownership.
Right. And so when you talk labor, though, I just want to be specific. You're not talking about they have to actually work in the, say it's a grocery store or something like that. You're just talking about like physical, entities representing labor is what you're saying.
I mean, I guess it doesn't have to be like physical work or whatever. I just mean like you would have to hire a laborer most of the time to kind of get this capital, or you'd have to do the opposite. You have to bring in capital in order to hire labor.
But so why, I don't understand why that would be a problem. I mean, there's people, if it's, what is the difference in your mind, or whatever, statistically speaking, of why it would be difficult to hire someone in a co-op versus non-co-op? Are you talking about if it was a mixed economy and that's because someone would pay higher if it's, there's a, corporate owned grocery store versus a co-op? You're saying that people wouldn't work at the co-op because they could pay, get paid.
It's not that people wouldn't want to work there necessarily. It's that companies are not allowed to or able to hire capital or hire labor separate of also bringing in capital, right? So like when you say like when people have to like buy in and stuff, like it's not, like the fundamental problem is in order to have stake at the company you have to work there. So investors can't really just invest in a company. They can't just provide the company with capital because they don't work there. The whole point of the co-op is to not have outside ownership. And that's going to run into a lot of issues with essentially investment not actually going to its most profitable use case.
Right. Well, and that's and so this is why I'm saying you're having an issue with it. I'm like trying to understand what your issue is. But yeah, you're trying to say it's not going to make enough capital, but that isn't necessarily the reason for a co-op. Sometimes a lot of these places they're more sustainable. They are more diverse. There's a lot of women, people of color that work at these places and own shares in it. There are many more things that people are driven by besides capital. So if you're saying that a co-op wouldn't work because it's not able to bring in as much capital as say, a big corporate, I can't probably disagree with you on that, but I do think that shouldn't be the only driver. And that is why I am a Democratic Socialist.
Well, so the issue, it's not just that they can't raise capital, it's that fundamentally we're going to see a more inefficient allocation of capital, of both capital and labor overall, because of because of this, because you're essentially mandating companies can't accept one without accepting the other. Like that's just going to lead fundamentally to probably a lower level of investment overall. You're going to see less job mobility because of this and because of the added transaction cost of having to buy into a co-op and having to sell off when you leave, presumably. I like that's like it's a fundamentally worse off like allocation of resources overall. It's not just that it doesn't make money or it doesn't like.
People always want to buy into things. I mean, like you said, there's a whole, there's investors who make startups and things like that. So I don't think that it would be.
They'd be prevented from that under a co-op system. They can't buy into, or if they buy into a worker co-op, they also have to like work there, right? Like they can't just have ownership of the co-op while being outside of it.
No, that's not true. It's not necessarily investor, but you do not have to be working at the grocery store, say, for example. I know this because I've invested money into a co-op and I do not work at that grocery store. So no, you just have a share, you have a vote.
Well, if you have a share and a vote outside the...
But a lot of times you don't have to pay a fuck ton of money to own something. That's why it's giving people who are typically wouldn't have any way to invest in a company because they don't have a fuck ton of money, like you said, a lot of these startups need. It's much more local too. But yeah, it's a more reasonable way for average Americans to have ownership, to have pride, to own something and to be a part of something and to vote and to have a vote and a say in their community.
So I guess like if you can invest in a co-op, that like I guess it can still probably holistically be like a worker co-op or whatever, but like that outside ownership and control is kind of fundamentally opposed to the conventional idea of a co-op, which is that the workers are the ones owning and controlling the firm. I get like you could, have co-ops that still like sell off, maybe 25% of the company is owned by outsiders and then 75% of the company is owned by the workers. But again, my point is that, even under that system, or even under, even in the case where maybe only, 20% of the company is owned by the workers, you would still probably see just an overall less efficient allocation of capital and labor than if you just had a market-based system. And, to the extent that like workers and people just want ownership of companies or local communities already, they are enabled to do that under a market system. Now, it's true that a lot of people
they have to start their own company. Yeah, they'd have to start their own company up, right? That's what you're saying. They can start their own, corporation or whatever.
You can buy ownership in companies without starting your own company, right? I mean, you can,
a fuck ton of money.
I can buy stock and. Right. I mean, you might not be able to. You're not going to have enough money to buy like controlling shares of large companies or whatever. But like certainly you are enabled to buy ownership in companies that for whatever reason you want to have some amount of say in. Obviously, for big companies, you're not gonna be able to have that much of a say if you don't have like a huge amount of capital or whatever.
Market? You're talking about the stock market. You can buy into companies and shares in the stock market, but whereas a co-op is more like you are holding a vote. Right.
There is a stock market, obviously, and you aren't able to do that. And like you can buy voting shares on the stock market, right? But there are. You can just, it's probably going to take more capital than just the stock market, but you can do equity financing even as like an individual, not through like publicly traded like stock markets, you can engage in that. It's just going to require more capital than the median person probably has. That's why people don't do it. And because it's riskier and people don't have that higher risk tolerance.
Okay, I totally hate to cut you off, but I am going to have to get off soon because I have to go get my daughter.
Sure.
So if you want, sorry, I know you told me like an hour to an hour and a half, so I just planned for that.
Yeah. No, you're good. No worries at all. Yeah.
Like final, if you want to do any like closeout question or anything, it doesn't matter to me. But I'm going to have to run.
I guess I'll sum up my position. There's one. So, there is one final thing I want to talk to you about, okay, which is, have you heard, I do this to all my guests, okay, have you heard of the glorious Shrimp Welfare Project, all right?
Have I heard of the Shrimp Welfare Project? I have no fucking idea what that is. You're going to have to explain.
Hell yeah, okay. The Shrimp Welfare Project, very brief summary, okay? It's the mathematically most effective charity, okay? Or at least one of them, okay? Basically, the way most shrimp are killed now is inhumane. Essentially, they're like left out in a bed of ice unless to like suffocate and freeze to death over the course of like 20 minutes. Very painful, horrible way for them to die. Shrimp Welfare Project essentially just gives farmers stunners to electrically stun shrimp before they go through this process, so they die an immediate and painless death as opposed to a prolonged and painful death, okay? And just a single dollar donated to the Shrimp Welfare Project can save up to, or actually more than, potentially, than 1,500 shrimp from experiencing this painful death. And they also end other inhumane practices, like there's a thing called eye stalk ablation, where like live female shrimp have their eyes crushed or ripped out to artificially increase their fertility. Very good, very effective charity. You should check it out. And yes, the evidence suggests that shrimp feel pain and are sentient, but that's a more complicated than the 1 minute spiel allows me. I guess I do want to sum up my position, and then I'll let you sum up yours and everything and your final thoughts, and I'll let you shout yourself out. I don't know if you have any social media or whatever you want to promote, but
can I really quick make an insufferable statement about the shrimp?
Sure,
I'm sorry, I'm a vegetarian. I'm also insufferable in the way that I'm a vegetarian.
Let's go.
Yeah,
W.
You're gonna have to say as much humanity as possible.
I've been vegetarian, or I was vegetarian for like 10 years or whatever, and I recently went vegan. I've been vegan for a little less than a month now, fully vegan. So yeah.
Okay, I'll take advice from you in that. Yeah, because I would like to be a vegan. I'm an aspiring vegan someday, but yeah.
Let's go. Yeah, Great. But I guess I'll sum up my thoughts, and then you can sum up yours and shout yourself out if you want to promote your Instagram or something. But just like fundamentally, I think we have seen, I think we have seen broadly just gains speaking on the poverty front globally. I think at least some of those are attributable to capitalism. No matter where you sort of draw the poverty line, you do see just a rightward shift in the amount of income people receive. You do see an increase in absolute standard of living. You do see a decrease in absolute poverty. I think you see the same thing in the U.S. And I think in the U.S., despite the fact that we might, see minimum wage not being increased, you do just see broad-based gains for the median worker, for even the bottom quintile, right? Even for people whose market income has not gone up significantly, you see that government transfers to them have gone up significantly, and that has increased their standard of living dramatically. That has lowered absolute poverty. And, none of this is zero sum with the sort of increased compensation that we might see for people like CEOs and, investors and, the capital class or whatever. In fact, a lot of the innovation, a lot of the stuff the capital class does actively increases workers' productivity, actively benefits consumers and, who are also workers, obviously. And, it just broadly improves the quality of life. I think if you move to a social system, you're going to lose a lot of the benefits from a market system, a lot of the benefits from a price system, even co-ops or whatever that maintains some of those things. You're going to lose a lot of the benefits broadly from allocative efficiency that a market provides for us. So I guess that's my general feelings. I'll let you sum up your thoughts and shout yourself out.
Yeah, that was a really good prepared statement you got. I have to run, so I'm not going to do anything super crazy. I do want to shout myself out. So there's actually a genocide in Gaza going on right now, and I know that's completely off topic, but I have to say it. I am actively working with real Palestinian families and fundraising for them, so that way they are able to eat and not starve. We have children who are malnourished, who are being bombed to death and starved to death right now. So if you give a fuck about humanity and you're not a piece of shit person and you actually want to help a Palestinian, please follow me on Instagram, Hot Takes Grace. I have donation links there to actual Palestinian people that I am in contact with every day. And if you want to help fundraise for one, please just hit me up and I can put you in touch with someone who desperately needs help right now. So that's what I'm going to end on.
All right, real. Well, I appreciate you coming on. I'm sure we'll talk more. I'll be talking to other Jubilee people soon, so I appreciate it.
Sweet. Thanks. Have a good one. Bye.
Yeah. See ya. Great talk. That was a fun talk. I don't know if Grok is still watching. Nonfon is Israeli pilled. I don't know what that means. Sample, if you want to join Grok, I know you wanted to talk to her. Grok, if you want to join and say whatever you wanted to say too. I don't know if he's still watching at all. I sent her Instagram in all my chats if you want to follow her on Instagram or donate to the Palestinian family. It's that she has in her bio. It was Gronk. He's just someone who is in my server.
Yeah. So
what's up?
That was a nice comment. I would have been a little bit more annoyed at the CAO memes, but that's me. That you're yourself, whatever. I think when you get asked questions like, is food a human right? You should make it very clear that you're not a demon. So it's like, you should be like, I think we should have a society which tries to make sure no one is starving and everyone is above poverty. And so I think we solved that with welfare, but I have philosophical problems with the idea of rights. I don't necessarily know what that term means, but whatever, something like that. I feel like is more optimal than because libertarians say that. And I don't really believe that, but actually close to. I feel like that
maybe
turns
probably
some
not
people's brains
optimal
against you. Yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
I also think you should have listened to everything I told you in DMs, right? So no. I feel like a big useful graph from the Splinter paper is that it compares side to side the increase in living standards, post-tax, post-transfers of each quintile, well, bottom, middle, and top, relative to their shares, right, of income. And so you can see, hey, inequality, at least by quintiles, not increasing, and you can see living standards at the end of the day increasing. So we are doing better than before, and not everything is the market. A lot of it is welfare, but it's not because of the unions. So yeah, I feel like that's also I feel like every time someone talks about minimum wage, I'm not, again, I'm in the middle about them. More recently I've seen data against them, but okay, but yeah, I mean, plausibly they have unemployment effects, and so what about that? If everyone deserves a wage, what about the unemployed people?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If you want to chat with me live, sub here or go to Nonfon420 on Twitch or Kick via the links below. Once again, please like and sub to help with the algorithm, and consider sending a donation through YouTube Super Thanks to directly support me, and I'll make sure to reply to any question you ask. See you guys next time.